My name is Sarah, and I am 25 years old. This is the story of how I discovered that my parents turned my childhood bedroom into a canine paradise for my younger brother's golden retriever while I was finishing my final semester at the University of Michigan. What started as an irritating discovery became the catalyst for changes in my life that I never imagined I would need to make. I grew up in a 2-story colonial house in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, a prosperous Detroit suburb where homes have manicured lawns and 3-car garages. My family always seemed perfect from the outside. Executive father, dedicated stay-at-home mother, 2 well-educated children. I was the older daughter, always responsible, always trying to please. My brother Jake, 3 years younger, was the charming rebel who could get out of any trouble with a smile. During my 4 years of college, I only came home during major holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, a few weeks in the summer. My room remained untouched, a sanctuary of my adolescence with indie band posters on lavender walls, shelves full of books I had collected since childhood, and the desk where I spent countless nights studying to get into my dream university. The final semester was brutal. I was majoring in journalism with a communication specialization, and between internships, final projects, and the pressure to find a job, I barely had time to call home. Mom always asked when I would come home for a visit, but I kept postponing, promising I would spend more time at home after graduation. Jake had moved back home after dropping out of community college in his second year. At 22, he was still finding his way, as my parents diplomatically explained to curious relatives. In reality, he spent his days playing video games in the basement and going out with friends at night. 6 months before my graduation, he came home with Cooper, a 2-year-old golden retriever he had rescued from a friend who could no longer care for him. Cooper was an adorable dog, I must admit. Golden, fluffy, with those expressive brown eyes typical of the breed. But he was also huge, energetic, and completely untrained. Jake promised he would take care of everything: walks, feeding, cleaning. As always, his promises lasted about 2 weeks. Soon Cooper was relieving himself on the living room Persian rug, chewing Mom's expensive shoes, and barking at every car that passed on the street. Jake would disappear during the day, leaving the dog alone to destroy the house. Dad complained constantly. Mom sighed while cleaning up yet another mess, but neither had the courage to give Jake an ultimatum to find another home for Cooper. The solution they found was something I only discovered 3 days before my graduation. I was finishing packing my belongings in the dorm when I received a call from my childhood best friend, Emma. She still lived in town and occasionally stopped by my parents' house to visit Mom, who always treated her like a second daughter. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, but promise me you won't freak out," she said, and from the hesitation in her voice, I immediately knew it was bad news. "What happened? Did someone get hurt?" "No, nothing like that. It's about your room." I felt a chill in my stomach. "My room? What about it?" Emma took a deep breath. "Your parents, well, they kind of turned it into a room for Cooper, Jake's dog." For a moment, I thought I had heard wrong. "What do you mean, a room for Cooper?" "They put a giant dog bed where your bed used to be. They bought expensive toys, stainless steel food and water bowls, even an orthopedic mat. There are pictures of Cooper everywhere. Sarah, it looks like they set up a baby's room except for a dog." My hand was shaking as I held the phone. And my things, my books, my posters, my desk, they're all in the basement, stacked in boxes. I hung up the phone and sat on the narrow dorm bed, trying to process what I had just heard. 22 years of my life, all the memories of my childhood and adolescence, reduced to dusty boxes in the basement. Meanwhile, a dog was sleeping in the bed where I had dreamed about my future. Graduation happened on a sunny May morning. My parents arrived punctually, smiling and proud, Mom wearing a new floral dress and Dad in his best suit. Jake didn't come, claiming he had other commitments, which we all knew meant he had gone out the night before and was hungover. During the ceremony, while the dean read hundreds of names, I watched my parents in the bleachers. They applauded enthusiastically when my name was called. Mom even stood up and waved. They looked like perfect parents, supportive and loving, but all I could think about was the dog bed where I used to study for high school exams. After the ceremony, we went to a nice restaurant in Ann Arbor. Dad ordered champagne to celebrate, and we talked about my job prospects and future plans. The conversation felt surreal, like we were actors playing roles in a family drama. They asked about my apartment hunt in Chicago, where I had landed an entry-level position at a marketing agency and offered to help with the security deposit. "We're so proud of you, sweetie," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've worked so hard for this." I wanted to ask about my room right then, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way they both looked so genuinely happy, or maybe I was afraid of ruining what might be our last good moment together. Instead, I smiled and thanked them for everything they had done for me. The drive back to Bloomfield Hills felt longer than usual. I sat in the back seat, watching familiar landmarks pass by through the window. The Target where Mom used to take me back to school shopping, the Starbucks where I had my first job at 16, the high school where I had been valedictorian. Everything looked exactly the same, but somehow different, like seeing a movie set after filming had wrapped. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed immediately that the landscaping around the front entrance had been changed. Mom had always prided herself on her rose garden, but now there were practical shrubs and a new section of artificial turf. Before I could ask about it, Cooper came bounding out of the house, his tail wagging furiously, golden fur gleaming in the afternoon sun. "There's our boy," Dad said, his voice taking on the tone people use with babies. "Did you miss us, Cooper? Did you miss us?" Cooper jumped on Dad's clean suit, leaving muddy paw prints, but Dad just laughed and scratched behind the dog's ears. I had never seen my father show that kind of immediate, uncomplicated affection to anyone, including me and Jake. Mom unlocked the front door, and we stepped into the house I had called home for 18 years. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not bad, exactly, but different. Dog smell mixed with the vanilla candles Mom always burned and something else I couldn't identify. The second thing I noticed were the baby gates blocking access to certain rooms and the expensive-looking dog toys scattered across the hardwood floors. "Sorry about the mess," Mom said, though she didn't sound sorry. If anything, she sounded almost fond as she picked up a rope toy shaped like a squirrel. Cooper gets excited when we leave him alone. I set my suitcase down in the entryway and looked around. The living room furniture had been rearranged to accommodate a massive dog crate in the corner. The Persian rug Dad had bought during a business trip to Iran was gone, replaced by something that looked more practical and stain-resistant. Family photos on the mantel now included several professional portraits of Cooper, including one where he was wearing a tiny graduation cap. "I know it looks different," Mom said, following my gaze, "but we've really fallen in love with having Cooper around. He brings so much joy to the house." Dad was still outside, throwing a tennis ball for Cooper in the backyard. Through the kitchen window, I could see him laughing as the dog bounded after it, his tie loosened and his suit jacket draped over a patio chair. In 22 years, I had never seen my father play in the backyard. "Where's Jake?" I asked. "Oh, he had to work today," Mom said quickly. "He got a job at Best Buy. Part-time, but it's a start." I knew she was lying. Jake had never held a job for more than a few weeks, and the idea of him working on a Saturday was laughable. But I didn't challenge her. There would be time for difficult conversations later. "I think I'll go upstairs and rest for a bit," I said. The ceremony was exhausting. Mom's face went pale. "Actually, sweetie, maybe you should rest in the guest room tonight. Your old room is, well, we've been using it for storage lately." Storage. That's what she called it. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, but I just nodded and smiled. "Of course. No problem." The guest room was on the same floor as my old bedroom, just down the hall. As I walked past the door that had been mine for so many years, I could hear sounds coming from inside. Scratching, the jingle of dog tags, the soft thump of a tail hitting something. I stopped and put my hand on the doorknob, then thought better of it. I wasn't ready yet. The guest room was nice enough, decorated in neutral tones with a queen-sized bed and a small sitting area by the window. It was the room where my grandmother used to stay when she visited, back when she was still alive. Now it felt like a hotel room, impersonal and temporary. I sat on the edge of the bed and called Emma. "How was graduation?" she asked. "Fine. I'm home now. Did you see your room?" "Not yet. I'm working up to it." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I probably should have told you this sooner, but I didn't want to upset you before graduation. It's not just that they gave Cooper your room. They really went all out. I mean, they spent more money on that dog setup than most people spend on their kids' bedrooms." I closed my eyes. "Tell me." "They hired a professional pet interior designer. I'm not even kidding. They have a custom-built feeding station, temperature-controlled water bowls, and they painted the walls this expensive blue-gray color that's supposed to be calming for dogs. They installed special lighting and even put in a small window air conditioning unit just for Cooper's comfort. Each detail felt like a small punch to the stomach. What about my photos? The pictures from high school, my artwork? I think they're in boxes in the basement. But Sarah, they took down your academic achievement certificates from the walls and replaced them with framed photos of Cooper at different stages of his life. There's even one of him as a puppy that they had enlarged and professionally mounted. After I hung up, I lay on the guest room bed and stared at the ceiling. Outside, I could still hear Dad playing with Cooper, his laughter carrying through the open window. 22 years of straight A's, academic scholarships, Dean's List every semester, graduating summa cum laude with a job already lined up, and my parents were more excited about a dog they had known for 6 months than they had ever been about any of my accomplishments. Dinner was awkward. Jake finally appeared around 6 o'clock, claiming he had been at work, though his clothes smelled like marijuana, and he had the glassy-eyed look he got when he was high. Cooper sat next to his chair, occasionally getting pieces of steak that Jake slipped him under the table. "So, Chicago," Dad said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. "Big change from Ann Arbor. It'll be good for me," I said. "New experiences, new challenges. We'll miss having you so close," Mom added, though she was looking at Cooper when she said it. Jake was mostly silent during dinner, occasionally laughing at something on his phone. When Mom asked him to put it away, he rolled his eyes but complied, the way a teenager might. "Jake's been doing really well lately," Mom said, as if she needed to convince me. "He's so responsible with Cooper. Takes him for walks every morning. Makes sure he gets his vitamins." I looked at Jake, who was again sneaking food to the dog. "That's great," I managed. After dinner, I volunteered to help with dishes, hoping for a moment alone with Mom, but she seemed distracted, constantly looking toward the living room where Cooper was playing with a squeaky toy. "He gets anxious when we're not in sight," she explained. "We're still working on his separation anxiety." "Mom," I said carefully, "can we talk about my room?" She froze with a plate halfway to the dishwasher. "What about it?" "Emma told me you turned it into Cooper's room." Mom set the plate down and turned to face me, her expression a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. "Sweetie, you've been gone for 4 years. You never said you were planning to move back home after graduation. We thought you were ready to move on. But it's still my room, my childhood room. All my things are safe in the basement," she interrupted. "We didn't throw anything away. We just needed the space. For a dog." "Cooper isn't just a dog," she said, and her voice had an edge to it that I rarely heard. "He's family, and he needed a proper space, somewhere quiet and comfortable. Your room has the best light, and it's far enough from the street noise." I stared at her, this woman who had raised me, who had attended every school play and parent-teacher conference, who had helped me fill out college applications and driven me to campus for freshman orientation. She was talking about Cooper with more tenderness in her voice than I had heard her use about me in years. "I would have liked to have been asked," I said quietly. "You're 22 years old, Sarah. You have your own life now. We can't keep everything exactly the same forever, waiting for you to come home." That night, I lay in the guest room bed listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. From Jake's room, I could hear the muffled sounds of video games. From my parents' room, the low murmur of late-night television. And from my old room, just down the hall, the soft sounds of Cooper sleeping peacefully in what had once been my sanctuary. I thought about all the nights I had spent in that room, doing homework at my desk, talking on the phone with friends, dreaming about my future while staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck to the ceiling in middle school. I wondered if those stars were still there, or if they had been painted over when Cooper moved in. Around midnight, I couldn't stand it anymore. I slipped out of the guest room and crept down the hall to my old bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of blue-gray wall that Emma had mentioned. I pushed the door open a few inches and peered inside. The room was unrecognizable. Where my twin bed had been, there was now a massive orthopedic dog bed that looked more expensive than the mattress I had slept on in my dorm. My desk was gone, replaced by an elaborate feeding station with elevated bowls and a small cabinet for storing dog supplies. The walls, once covered with my posters and photographs, now displayed professional pet portraits, and a collection of Cooper's leashes and collars arranged like artwork. Cooper was sleeping peacefully in the center of the room, his golden fur gleaming in the moonlight that came through windows that had once been mine. He looked content and comfortable, like he belonged there, like it had always been his room. I closed the door softly and went back to the guest room, where I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out when exactly I had stopped being my parents' priority. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Cooper barking excitedly in the backyard. Through the guest room window, I could see Jake throwing a frisbee, while Dad watched from the patio, coffee mug in hand. It was barely 7 in the morning, earlier than I had ever seen Jake awake voluntarily in his entire life. I got dressed and went downstairs to find Mom in the kitchen, preparing what looked like a gourmet breakfast, not for the family, but for Cooper. She was mixing fresh chicken, rice, and vegetables in a ceramic bowl that probably cost more than most people spend on their own dinnerware. "Good morning, sweetie," she said, without looking up from her task. "There's coffee made if you want some." "Thanks. What are you making?" "Cooper's breakfast. He has a sensitive stomach, so we make all his meals from scratch. The vet recommended this specific recipe." I poured myself coffee and watched my mother carefully measure supplements into the dog's food. She had never shown this level of culinary attention to any meal she had made for me or Jake. Our breakfast growing up had been cereal, toast, maybe scrambled eggs on weekends if we were lucky. "How much does all this cost?" I asked. "The food? Oh, not too much. Maybe $60 a week. $60 a week for dog food. When I was in high school, Mom had complained about spending $30 on groceries for the entire family's meals for 2 days. Jake came in through the back door, Cooper bounding beside him. Both of them looked happier and more energetic than I had seen either of them in years. Jake was actually smiling, not the sarcastic smirk he usually wore, but a genuine expression of joy. "Morning, sis," he said, scratching Cooper behind the ears. "Ready for breakfast, buddy?" Mom set the elaborate meal down, and Cooper dove in with enthusiasm. Jake sat on the floor beside him, stroking his fur and talking to him in a soft voice I had never heard him use with humans. "You're up early," I observed. "Cooper's an early riser," Jake said. "Gets me up every morning at 6:30 for his walk. Best alarm clock I've ever had." I stared at my brother, this person who had never held a job for more than a few weeks, who had dropped out of school, who had spent the last 3 years living in our parents' basement playing video games. Now he was talking about responsibility and routine, like they were gifts Cooper had given him. "Jake," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you move Cooper into my room instead of keeping him in your room?" Jake's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of the old defensiveness crossing his face. "Cooper needed more space. My room's too small, and he was getting restless down in the basement. Your room has better windows, more natural light. It's healthier for him. But it was my room. You don't live here anymore," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "You haven't lived here for 4 years. Cooper lives here now. He needed a proper space, not some cramped corner of my room. I never said I wouldn't come back. Come on, Sarah. You were never coming back. You made that pretty clear. Always talking about your big plans, your career, how you couldn't wait to get out of this boring suburb. Cooper actually wants to be here." The words stung, because there was truth in them. I had been eager to leave, had talked constantly about my plans to live in big cities and have important careers. But that didn't mean I wanted my childhood erased, my room given away like I had never existed. Dad came in from the patio, still in his pajamas and robe. "Beautiful morning," he announced to no one in particular. "Cooper and I are going to wash the car after breakfast. Aren't we, boy?" Cooper's tail wagged at the sound of his name. Dad knelt down and let the dog lick his face, laughing like a child. I had never seen my father this relaxed, this genuinely happy. Even on Christmas mornings or my graduation days, he had always seemed slightly tense, like he was performing happiness rather than feeling it. "Dad," I said, "could we talk privately for a few minutes?" His smile faded slightly. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" We went into his home office, a room that had always been his sanctuary. The walls were lined with law books and framed certificates from his career as a corporate attorney. His massive mahogany desk dominated the space, covered with neat stacks of papers and his laptop. "I want to talk about my room," I said. Dad sat behind his desk and folded his hands, immediately shifting into his professional mode. I see. Emma told you. Why didn't you ask me first? Sweetheart, you're 22 years old. You have your own life, your own apartment. We couldn't keep your room as a shrine forever. It wasn't a shrine. It was my room, my space in this house. Dad leaned back in his chair. Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you. When Jake brought Cooper home, your mother and I were skeptical. Another one of Jake's impulsive decisions. Another responsibility he would abandon after a few weeks. But something remarkable happened. Jake changed. For the first time in his adult life, he had something to care for, something that depended on him. He started getting up early, keeping schedules, showing genuine responsibility. That's great for Jake, but let me finish, Dad interrupted. Your mother and I have been worried about Jake for years. He was directionless, unmotivated, living in our basement with no apparent desire to build a life for himself. Cooper gave him purpose, and when we saw how much the dog meant to him, how much he had changed, we wanted to support that. Cooper needed a proper room, and yours was available. Available, I repeated. Yes, available. You were finishing college. You had a job lined up in Chicago. You were moving forward with your life. This house was becoming a place you visited occasionally, not a place you lived. We made a practical decision. I looked around his office, at all the symbols of his success and status. Did it occur to you that maybe I would want to come home sometimes? That maybe I would want to feel like I still belonged here? Dad's expression softened slightly. Of course you belong here. You're our daughter. But belonging doesn't mean keeping everything exactly the same forever. It means adapting, growing, making room for new circumstances. New circumstances like a dog being more important than your own daughter. That's not fair, Sarah. Cooper isn't more important than you, but he lives here every day. His needs are immediate and present. Your needs? Well, you're independent now. You don't need us to maintain your childhood bedroom. I left his office feeling more confused than when I had entered it. Everything he said made logical sense, but it still felt wrong, like there was something important being overlooked in all the practical considerations. I spent the rest of the morning walking around the neighborhood, trying to clear my head. Bloomfield Hills looked exactly the same as it had when I was growing up. Manicured lawns, expensive cars in driveways, the kind of quiet prosperity that had surrounded my entire childhood. But I felt like a stranger walking through it, like I was visiting someone else's hometown. When I returned to the house, I found Mom in the living room teaching Cooper tricks. She had a bag of expensive-looking treats and was patiently working with him on commands. The dog was focused and attentive, clearly eager to please her. "He's so smart," she said, when she noticed me watching. "The trainer says he's one of the most intelligent dogs she's ever worked with. Look at this." She told Cooper to sit, stay, then placed a treat on his nose. The dog remained perfectly still until she gave the release command, then caught the treat in the air. Mom clapped and praised him enthusiastically. "That's impressive," I said. "He learns so quickly. We've been working with a professional trainer twice a week. It's amazing how much personality he has, how much he understands. Sometimes I think he knows what we're thinking before we do." I watched my mother's face as she talked about Cooper. Her eyes were bright, her voice animated in a way I hadn't heard in years. When had she stopped talking about me and Jake with this kind of enthusiasm? When had we stopped being the center of her world? "Mom, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course, honey. Are you happier now? With Cooper here? With Jake being more responsible? With the house organized around the dog's needs?" Mom was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I think I am happier, yes. But not because we love Cooper more than we love you and Jake. It's because Cooper brought something out in all of us that had been missing. He gave Jake purpose. He gave your father joy, and he gave me something to nurture again. When you kids grew up and became independent, I felt lost, like my primary job was over. Cooper helped me remember what it felt like to be needed. But you were needed. By me. By Jake. Not in the same way, sweetie. You both needed me less and less as you got older, which is how it should be. But Cooper will always need us. He'll never grow up and move away and start his own life. He'll always be our responsibility, our family member who depends on us completely. I understood then what had really happened. Cooper hadn't just moved into my room. He had moved into the space I had vacated in my parents' hearts. Not because they loved him more than me, but because he filled a need that I no longer filled. He was the child who would never grow up and leave, the family member who would always want to be with them. That afternoon, Jake asked if I wanted to go for a walk with him and Cooper. I agreed, curious to see more of this new version of my brother. We headed toward the local park, Cooper trotting happily between us on his leash. "He's a good dog," I said. "The best," Jake replied. "I know what you're thinking, though, that this is just another phase for me, that I'll get bored and abandon him like everything else." I wasn't thinking that. Yes, you were, and I don't blame you. I've given everyone plenty of reasons to doubt me over the years. We walked in silence for a few minutes, Cooper stopping occasionally to sniff interesting scents or greet other dogs we encountered. "Can I tell you something?" Jake said eventually. "I was really depressed before Cooper came along. Like seriously depressed. Not just lazy or unmotivated, but actually struggling to get out of bed most days. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want Mom and Dad to worry more than they already were. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and noticed things I had missed before. He had gained weight in a healthy way, filled out from the too thin person he had been the last time I saw him. His skin looked clearer, his eyes brighter. He carried himself differently, with more confidence. "Cooper saved me," he continued. "I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. Having something that depended on me completely, that loved me unconditionally, that was excited to see me every single day, it changed everything. I started getting up because he needed me to. I started taking care of myself because I needed to be healthy enough to take care of him. I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. "I'm glad you found something that made you feel better. But you're upset about the room." "Yes, I'm upset about the room." Jake nodded. "I get it. I really do. But Sarah, you have to understand. Cooper isn't just my pet. He's my partner, my best friend, my reason for getting up in the morning. When Mom and Dad offered to turn your room into his space, it wasn't just about giving him a nice place to sleep. It was about acknowledging that he's a permanent part of this family, that his comfort and happiness matter." We had reached the park, and Jake unclipped Cooper's leash to let him run in the fenced dog area. We sat on a bench and watched him play with other dogs, his tail wagging constantly, his entire body radiating joy. "I never had that," Jake said quietly. "That kind of pure happiness. Even as a kid, I was always angry about something, always feeling like I didn't fit anywhere. Cooper is happy just to exist, just to be alive and be with the people he loves. He taught me that it was possible to feel that way." I watched Cooper playing, and I began to understand why my family had fallen so completely in love with him. He wasn't just a pet. He was a teacher, a healer, a source of uncomplicated love in a complicated world. "I still wish you had asked me," I said. "You're right. We should have asked. But honestly, I don't think any of us realized how much Cooper would change everything. It wasn't a calculated decision to replace you with a dog. It was a gradual shift, day by day, until suddenly the house revolved around him, and it felt natural and right. That evening, the four of us sat in the living room watching television. Cooper was sprawled across the couch between Mom and Dad, his head in Mom's lap, his legs stretched across Dad's thighs. Jake sat on the floor beside the couch, one hand resting on Cooper's back. I sat in the armchair that had always been my designated spot, but I felt like an observer rather than a participant. The show was some mindless sitcom, but my parents were laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, making comments to Cooper as if he were following the plot. Jake was scrolling through his phone, but he looked up frequently to make eye contact with the dog, like they were sharing private jokes. I realized that I was witnessing something I had never seen before. My family completely relaxed and content. There was no underlying tension, no unspoken disappointments, no sense that anyone was performing their role rather than living it. Cooper had somehow dissolved all the complicated dynamics that had defined our relationships for years. But I also realized that there was no space for me in this new configuration, not because they didn't love me, but because they had found a way to be happy without me, and my presence disrupted the peace they had created. After the show ended, everyone began their nighttime routines. Cooper followed each family member around, supervising their activities like a concerned parent. He watched Dad brush his teeth, sat outside the bathroom while Mom removed her makeup, and followed Jake to the kitchen for a final snack. "He likes to make sure everyone's okay before bedtime," Mom explained. "He won't settle down until he's checked on all of us." I went to the guest room and closed the door, but Cooper scratched at it softly until I opened it again. He came in, sniffed around the room thoroughly, then sat by the bed and looked at me expectantly. "What do you want?" I asked. He tilted his head and made a soft whining sound, like he was trying to communicate something important. After a few minutes, he walked to the door and looked back at me, then returned to sit by the bed. It took me a while to understand what he was doing. He was including me in his nighttime routine, making sure I was okay before he could rest. Despite being the one who had taken my room, my place in the family's daily rhythm, he was trying to take care of me too. I reached out and petted his head, surprised by how soft his fur was, how warm and solid he felt. "It's okay, boy. I'm fine. You can go to bed." He looked at me for a long moment, as if assessing whether I was telling the truth, then licked my hand once and trotted out of the room toward what had once been my bedroom. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened, everything I had learned about my family and myself. I had come home expecting to find my room waiting for me, expecting to slip back into my old role as the responsible daughter, the academic achiever, the one who made my parents proud. Instead, I found a family that had moved on, that had found happiness in my absence, that no longer defined themselves in relation to my needs and accomplishments. It hurt, but it also felt like freedom. For 22 years, I had carried the weight of being the good daughter, the one who never caused problems, who always met expectations. I had shaped my entire identity around being the child my parents could rely on, the one who made them proud. But Cooper had freed me from that burden by taking over the job of being the center of their world. The next morning was my last day at home before driving to Chicago to start my new job. I woke up early and found Dad in the kitchen, making coffee and reading the newspaper. Cooper was lying at his feet, content and peaceful. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, sweetheart. Ready for the big move?" "I think so." I poured myself coffee and sat across from him at the breakfast table. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When I was growing up, were you happy?" Dad looked up from his newspaper, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, were you genuinely happy? Or were you just doing what you thought you were supposed to do as a father and husband?" He was quiet for a long time, considering the question seriously. "I think I was satisfied," he said finally. "I was proud of you and Jake, proud of the life we had built. But happy, the way I am now, with Cooper here, with Jake finding his direction, with your mother having something to nurture again? No, I don't think I was genuinely happy very often." "Why not?" "Because I was always worried. About money, about your futures, about whether I was being a good enough father, whether I was providing enough, teaching you the right lessons. There was always pressure, always something to fix or improve or worry about. Cooper doesn't require any of that. He just wants to be loved and cared for, and he gives love back without conditions or expectations." I understood then that Cooper hadn't just taken my room. He had given my parents permission to stop being perfect parents and start being happy people. The weight of raising successful children, of molding us into productive adults, had been lifted from their shoulders. They could finally just enjoy loving someone without wondering if they were doing it right. Mom and Jake joined us for breakfast, and we had the most relaxed family meal I could remember in years. Everyone seemed lighter, funnier, more present. Cooper sat beside the table, occasionally receiving bits of bacon from Jake, his tail wagging constantly. "We should probably talk about your things in the basement," Mom said eventually. "What would you like us to do with them?" I had been dreading this conversation, but now it felt less painful than I had expected. "Could you pack up the important stuff and ship it to me in Chicago? The books, the photo albums, anything that has sentimental value. The rest, I guess you can donate it." "Are you sure?" Mom asked. "Some of those things have been with you since you were little." "I'm sure. I don't need to hold on to everything from my childhood. I'd rather remember it than try to preserve it." After breakfast, I went down to the basement to go through my belongings. 22 years of my life were contained in about 15 cardboard boxes, neatly labeled in Mom's handwriting. School papers, art projects, books I had loved, clothes that no longer fit, trophies and certificates from various achievements. Jake came downstairs while I was sorting through everything. "Need help?" "Sure." I handed him a box of old school papers. "You can throw most of this away. I don't need my 4th grade math tests." We worked in companionable silence for a while, creating piles of things to keep, things to donate, and things to throw away. It felt therapeutic, like I was consciously choosing which parts of my past to carry forward and which to leave behind. Sarah, Jake said eventually. "I want you to know that I understand why you're upset about the room. If someone had given away my space without asking, I'd be mad too. Thank you for saying that. But I also want you to know that Cooper didn't replace you. He just filled a different need. You were always going to grow up and leave. That's what kids are supposed to do. Cooper will never leave. He'll always be here, always need us, always love us unconditionally. That doesn't make him better than you. Just different." I looked at my brother, this person who had struggled for so long to find his place in the world, and felt proud of the man he was becoming. "You're going to be okay, aren't you?" "Yeah, I think I am. For the first time in my life, I think I'm going to be okay." That afternoon, I loaded my car with the few boxes of belongings I was taking to Chicago. The rest would be shipped later, after I found a permanent apartment. My parents and Jake stood in the driveway to see me off, Cooper sitting patiently beside them. "Drive safely," Mom said, hugging me tightly. "Call us when you get there." "I will." Dad shook my hand, then pulled me into an uncharacteristic hug. "We're proud of you, kiddo. Always have been." Jake hugged me last. "Don't be a stranger, okay? Cooper likes having an aunt." I laughed, despite myself. "I'll visit when I can." As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my family waving from the driveway. Cooper's tail was wagging, and he looked confused about why I was leaving. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, a desire to turn around and stay in the safe, familiar world of my childhood home. But I kept driving toward Chicago, toward my new job and my new life. I had learned something important during my visit home. Sometimes love means letting go, means making space for new kinds of happiness, means accepting that relationships change and evolve. My parents didn't love me less because they loved Cooper. Jake wasn't less important to them because he had found purpose through caring for a dog. And I wasn't less valued because my childhood room had been repurposed. I was 22 years old, college educated, employed and independent. I had the rest of my life ahead of me, filled with possibilities my parents could never have imagined when they were my age. Cooper would always be a dog, dependent and loving and present. I would become whoever I chose to become. 3 hours into the drive, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Hi, sweetie. Just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine, Mom. About halfway there." "Good. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said, about wishing we had asked you before giving Cooper your room. You were right. We should have included you in that decision, even if the outcome would have been the same. I'm sorry." "Thank you for saying that. And Sarah, your room may belong to Cooper now, but you will always have a place in this house. Always. That will never change, no matter what other changes we make." After I hung up, I realized that my mother had given me exactly what I needed. Acknowledgement that my feelings mattered, that I still belonged, that I would always be welcome. Cooper could have my room, but I would always have a place in my family's hearts. 6 months later, I was settled in my Chicago apartment and loving my job when I received a package from home. Inside were photos from Cooper's first birthday party. My parents had thrown him a celebration complete with a dog-safe cake, presents, and party hats. The photos showed my entire family laughing and playing with Cooper in the backyard, everyone looking genuinely joyful. There was also a handwritten note from Jake. "Thought you'd want to see how spoiled Cooper is getting. He misses his Aunt Sarah. When are you coming to visit?" I looked at the photos for a long time, studying the faces of my family members. They looked like people I recognized but had never quite seen before. Relaxed, content, authentically happy. Cooper had given them something I never could have. The simple pleasure of loving without conditions, without expectations, without the complicated weight of human relationships. I called home that evening and talked to each family member for a few minutes. When Jake put the phone near Cooper's ear, I could hear the dog's tail thumping against the floor, and for some reason, that sound made me smile. "I'll come visit next month," I promised. "Maybe I'll bring Cooper a present." "He'd like that," Jake said. "We all would." After I hung up, I realized that Cooper had done something remarkable for our family. He had taught us that love doesn't have to be complicated, that happiness doesn't require perfection, and that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to make room for an unexpected future. My childhood bedroom was gone, but my family was happier than they had ever been. And maybe, in the end, that was more important than preserving everything exactly as it used to be. Maybe growing up meant learning that some changes, even painful ones, can lead to something better than what came before. I never got my room back, but I gained something more valuable: the knowledge that my family's love for me wasn't diminished by their love for Cooper, and that my own happiness didn't depend on keeping everything in my childhood exactly as I had left it. Sometimes the best gift you can give the people you love is the freedom to grow and change, even if that growth means they need you less than they used to. Cooper may have taken my room, but he gave my family the gift of uncomplicated joy. And in the end, that seemed like a fair trade.